We need to talk about the money, honey. Hello, my name is Miranda and I am a second-year trainee clinical psychologist. Welcome or welcome back to Debate and Not Hate, the series where I give you my opinions on current issues in psychology. The topic of today's video is going to be working for free as an aspiring clinical psychologist. And spoiler alert, I'm kind of almost completely, totally against this in almost all situations. So that is the perspective that I'm going to be coming from. The layout to today's video is as follows. I'm going to give you just a little bit of an introduction and background to the issue before moving on to unpacking and hopefully dispelling the top 5 common arguments which are used in favour of aspiring psychologists working for free. I'm then going to round up this video by thinking about the future of unpaid work and the role of unpaid work in other psychological professions like counselling psychology. So before I get into all of that, just a couple of things. Number 1, all the letters, articles, Twitter threads that I reference are going to be linked in the description box below, along with timestamps if you want to jump around the video or check any of those resources out. Number 2, this video is not in any which way designed to shame people who have worked in unpaid roles before. I certainly have in the past. It's more to think about how unpaid work has an impact on the profession as a whole. So with all of that covered off, let's get straight into it. There is a long history of these honorary assistant psychologist jobs existing in the job marketplace, and that is the first and last time that you're going to hear me using the H word, because as one of my Twitter friends very rightly pointed out, it just feels like a weird attempt on behalf of the employer to dress up the fact that it's an unpaid role by using this really grandiose terminology. And I think secondly, that word also has this dual meaning of having bestowed this great honor on someone. And I feel like that also just plays into these really awkward, weird power dynamics of how the person who's not being paid should also, on top of not being paid, feel really grateful for that, which, anyway, I digress. As an aspiring psychologist myself, I routinely came across these unpaid positions. And for me, the ones that felt really problematic were the ones which were directed towards graduates who had completed their studies, proven their skill set, but also ones which were asking for a really big time commitment. You know, not ones where you had just a couple of hours here and there on a weekly basis, but were very much 3 days minimum up to full-time work for free. I think we can all agree that there are some potential concerns around exploitation here. And actually, what's even more interesting is that these concerns have been around for ages. So I went down into the BPS archives, deep down into that treasure trove, and found this letter dating back to 2006 of someone who'd written in after seeing these sorts of roles being advertised and outlining their concerns regarding exploitation. And you're like, 2006? This is what I looked like in 2006, significant time has passed and we have all of these concerns and it seems to me like the issue isn't moving forward. And this is exemplified by the fact that not very long ago, one of my course mates, a fellow trainee clinical psychologist, found this role being advertised on Twitter where a company was asking for a graduate psychologist who also had experience of working in mental health settings to offer up a minimum of 22 hours a week of their time for free, at a minimum. Anyway, they got called out, they rescinded their offer. It was like this big girl power moment. And as you can see, this activity got a lot of support both on Twitter and on Facebook, which I think says to me, a lot of people are disgruntled by the fact that these positions exist, and yet the issue doesn't really seem to be moving forward. So let's think about some of the common arguments which are used in favour of people working for free. Common argument number 1, I would say, is this idea that it's this rite of passage to work for free at the beginning of your career. And, to some extent, these unpaid roles have existed for a long time alongside things like apprenticeships. So yeah, we have all been there and done that. My rebuttal though, number 1, I think the argument of well, we've always done things like this is probably the worst one you can use when thinking about whether you should change or stay the same. But number 2, and more importantly, the pressures on young people are just growing exponentially, like especially in the last 10 years. You know, we're asking young people to invest tens of thousands of pounds into their education, and like, it really does take the cheese and biscuits to kind of imply that on the other side that investment is not enough to be able to immediately walk into a paying role. Also, the cost of living is just going up at an alarming rate. So is it really ethical or moral or fair to be offering these positions given the climate that we're in? I think my third point to that is that not everyone can afford to take on unpaid positions. It's definitely the reason why I took a year away from psychology when I first graduated, because I just didn't have the financial flexibility to be able to pursue those kind of jobs. And clinical psychology has been banging the drum, especially recently, about inclusivity and diversity. So I think we really need to think very carefully of what the wider ramifications are of these unpaid posts existing and the kinds of people that might be excluded from career progression when they can't access them. Common argument number 2, I would say, is this feeling that services are somehow doing aspiring psychologists a favor by offering them an unpaid position. There's this huge developmental opportunity, and it's a fair exchange in terms of what the service offers and what the aspiring psychologist offers. And I don't really feel like that stands up in court. So small digression, my other half works in recruitment, and every now and then he tries to educate me a little bit on the art of negotiation. And he's telling me that sometimes when companies and prospective employees are in a bit of a stalemate in terms of the particulars of the employee contract, the client will be a little bit crafty and offer something that's of low value to them, perceived high value to the employee, and then ask for something high value in return. So example, they will say, no, I'm not going to offer you the salary that you want. That's a thing of high value to the employee. What I will do is throw in the opportunity to work from home for 2 days a week to sweeten the deal. Acting as if that's a fair trade when it really is no skin off the company's nose to offer that. And I feel like that sometimes is what happens in these sort of situations with the unpaid assistant psychologist roles. That there is like a lot of drama and theatrics that are made around the fact that, you know, you're gonna get all this supervision and these training opportunities and opportunities to shadow people, and I don't want to undermine that because you can definitely learn a lot from these roles. What I would say is that at a push, these things are taking up 4 hours out of the week, and also the vast majority of them, things like training, things like shadowing, those are things that would have been happening whether that psychologist was there or not there. So that's 4 hours of the week investment from the company, some of that which would have been happening anyway. And then if you're asking for the psychologist to work for 3 days in return, they're investing 18 hours of their time that they can't get back, that they can't use for paid opportunities. It just doesn't seem like a fair exchange. I feel like if we're being really honest, the favor that's being exchanged here is the opportunity for the psychologist to put that assistant psychologist title onto their CV so then they can segue into paid work. And if that's the case, that just doesn't really feel right, does it? Argument number 3 is that the NHS doesn't have funding for more paid posts, so I'll work for free. There's an element of truth there. Of course, the NHS is on its knees, and mental health services could really do with a lot more investment than what they're getting at the moment. Unfortunately, people working for free only serve to reinforce that cycle of underinvestment, not solve it. If you're thinking about yourself as the NHS boss and you're looking at services, if people are coming in to work for no money, with a smile on their face, and a service is showing that they can get a steady stream of people who are willing to do the same thing, you're literally just going to be like, okay, thank you, bye-bye. There is absolutely no motivation for you to set aside some of your budget to turn that into a paid position. It just doesn't make business sense, does it? So yeah, I think that's all I have to say on that one. Argument 4 is this. Clinical psychology is so competitive there aren't enough paid positions to go around, and I feel that. Many of you will know that my first year after graduation, I took completely away from psychology. One of the primary reasons being that I really struggled to find paid work. However, I think a lot of this perception, I'm not saying all of it, but a lot of it is based on the fact that many of us view that assistant psychologist role as like the gold dust, golden ticket, the only thing that we can do to get onto the clinical psychology doctorate, and that's just not the case. There are so many ways that you can get the necessary clinical experience that you need while getting paid. And here are lots of videos that show you just how to do that and give you more information on the types of roles that exist. However, I do acknowledge that there does need to be, I think, maybe a little bit more from the perspective of like courses and universities to just highlight how valuable the clinical experience can be from differing routes, and to make sure that that's reflected both at the application and selection process. So argument number 5, last but not least, and I feel like, to be fair, this is more implicit than it is explicit, but it really is the one that annoys me the most. It's this idea that like, it's your passion. Underlying message.
Therefore you should be happy to work for free.
And I'm like,
what? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Like, it really feels like it only exists for people who are in either caring or creative roles. And I'm like, where did that come from? Like, I cannot survive on my passions alone. They simply do not pay the bills. But also, I think we're playing a little bit of a dangerous game with that mentality, because as I said earlier, there are increasing pressures on graduates in terms of the cost of education, in terms of the cost of living. So I really do feel strongly in my soul that people's walking away point away from psychology is going to be increasingly lower. Like, if we don't push to create financially viable career paths, they're going to be looking to other careers and just saying like, you know, I find that kind of interesting. It pays well. The smart money is going down that route. Like, honestly, I think for me, if I had my time again, I might have been a dentist. And so I just don't think we want to run that line. We don't want to risk losing our brightest, most exciting, diverse psychologists to other professions simply because we cannot get our act together. I think for me, another concern which falls under that like passion headline it's just this idea that aspiring psychologists need to be working all these different roles alongside their education to make it work. And I do feel like there is a certain glorification around the person who did the unpaid role but also worked full-time hours while studying, because that's the determination that it takes to get onto the doctorate. And that's just like fundamentally not okay. I don't think that that should be the standard whatsoever. We are in the business of mental health and encouraging people to look after themselves. And I don't think we should be creating this expectation for people coming up the ranks to be working all kinds of wild situations and arrangements. And I think, unfortunately, unpaid positions only feed into that problem because people naturally have to take on other roles, other responsibilities to get some money into their lifestyle. Okay, so moving the conversation on. So as much as I've like been, complaining and on a bit of a tirade there, I do think there are some very specific, unique, highly controlled situations where unpaid work doesn't need to be exploitative and problematic. So the first being, if we can contain the unpaid working hours to one working day, that feels like a more tenable arrangement. And I think also if we're thinking about, that equation in terms of what the service and what the psychologist invest in terms of their time and what they can get out of that arrangement, I feel like it's a lot more balanced if we're restricting it to just that one working day. The second thing that I was thinking about is, people who are still students, they're still doing their undergraduate studies. And I haven't fully formulated this because, to be honest, it's been a while since I was an undergraduate myself. But back in the day, I had a maintenance loan which felt like it could cover, all my basic requirements. And I also had a very flexible study schedule. So I don't think it would have been completely unreasonable or not doable for me to do an unpaid day here and there and then to balance that with paid work in a bar or cafe, for example. I think the final thing that I want to consider is people who don't have the right to work in the UK yet. That's something that they're seeking, and that I wouldn't want to kind of limit their opportunities to develop their clinical skills while they're waiting for that to all work out. But I think what's most important across all of those three examples is that we have guidelines and regulations that exist which determine what's appropriate and what's not. Because again, I had to look deep into the web to find guidelines around the employment of assistant psychologists, and I think they were out of date because they weren't on any official website, and I think that's the problem. You know, that is fertile grounds for exploitation and something that we really need to think about and give due attention to. Finally, I just wanted to hold in mind our sibling and cousin psychological peers who work in, for example, counselling psychology, where I think the issue of unpaid work is way more pronounced. So for people doing the counselling psychology doctorate, they don't get paid to train, and I'm like, I don't understand how that's happened because we're doing exactly the same thing. Like, honestly, if people could like clue me up on the origins of that decision, that would be fascinating. So I think it's a real problem for them, but also for counsellors. Like, I have seen adverts for qualified counsellors asking them to work for free. It's like,
have some respect.
So I think it's just, you know, being mindful as aspiring clinical psychologists, soon to be clinical psychologists, to hold all of us in mind when we're having these conversations around unpaid work and to advocate for us all. Because we don't win until we all win. Right, that's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Before I sign off, just small, tiny little thing. So yesterday I hit 1,000 subscribers. Yay! And honestly, I cannot express to you guys, like, it might not seem like it, but I find this whole process so unbelievably anxiety provoking. So I really, really do appreciate like everyone who has liked, subscribed, given words of encouragement, commented. Like, it really does mean so much to me, and it's made the process just that much more enjoyable. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. So I will leave you to it. Thanks so much again for watching, and I will look forward to speaking to you next week. Ciao for now.